Lou, thank you for that heartfelt and humbling introduction. Always a pleasure to work with you as well. Unlike Lou, I actually did take a look at the panel description before moments ago. I actually did make one change, as you'll note, to the title. I added a technology and policy roadmap for zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. Before I begin, just to credential myself, heavy-duty vehicles are near and dear to my heart. About 18 years ago, I was with the US EPA up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, writing the current standards for emission standards for heavy-duty vehicles in the US, what we call heavy-duty 2010. And those standards required SCR and diesel particulate filters on all trucks and buses in the US. And then about 8 years ago, I was on the National Academy of Sciences panel that was the technical underpinning for the first ever fuel economy CO2 greenhouse gas standards for heavy-duty vehicles in the United States that were phased in from 2014 to 2017. And so it really is a great pleasure for me to actually now look at the next stage, which is how do you decarbonize heavy-duty vehicles. So my sincere gratitude to Christian and Agora for inviting me here to speak with you today, and particularly on this subject, which I like a lot. So let's see if I can work the slides. Yeah. So next 30 minutes, I'm going to try to cover really three topics. One is to give you a big picture perspective on heavy-duty vehicles, global inventories, low-carbon scenarios. I'll then take a look at the technologies and new business models, and I'm really going to focus on long-haul tractor-trailer trucks. That is, for reasons which I will explain, the biggest challenge and the most important challenge in this sector. And then I'm going to look at policies, and I'm going to compare and contrast everything that we've been doing on light duty to get to zero-emission vehicles for light duty, and think a little bit about what we should be doing for heavy duty. And that is an absolute nascent discussion on my part, and I think it's something that we should all focus a lot more on, frankly. And then some findings and conclusions. All right. So to start, let's take a look at inventories. And I show you two graphics here. And the big point is that policymakers should be paying more attention to heavy-duty vehicles than they have. That's because if climate change is global, as we know it is, heavy-duty vehicles are roughly the same magnitude of CO2 emissions as light-duty. And yet in the US, in Europe, in Japan, in Canada, in California, we all focus primarily on light-duty vehicles. And that makes sense for our own inventories, but it doesn't make sense globally. On the left-hand chart, you see at the top the purple and the blue as heavy-duty trucks and buses, going from 10% in terms of population to 46% in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. And on the right-hand side, you see the segments of heavy-duty vehicles from medium-duty truck, light commercial truck, and heavy. And the big green wedge that is increasing substantially are the long-haul tractor-trailer trucks, primarily, classes 7, 8 in the US, right? So not only is it a very, very large segment of the global portion, but if we are to focus on one segment in the heavy-duty spectrum, long-haul is really where we should putting most of our time and effort. Finally, I'll say the flip side of the fact that we collectively haven't really been focusing very much on heavy duty. The reverse is true in Brazil, in India, in China, where 60% of transportation fuel consumption, greenhouse gas emissions, are in the heavy duty sector, which is one of the reasons why China did not wait for Europe in setting its own fuel economy standards for heavy duty, right? Europe is going to propose later this year. China has already set. All right. So hopefully I have your attention. I'm going to pound a little bit more on long haul, what we call Class 8 in the United States. And the only way you can really take on the heavy-duty sector is by chopping it up into different segments. And here you see urban delivery, drayage, vehicles that are in and out of ports, regional delivery, and long haul. And on the top, you see duty cycle, range, payload, battery requirements, infrastructure, CO2 footprint. And all of the arrows are going down, indicating a far greater challenge, barrier, et cetera, for the Class 8s in terms of duty cycle, range, payload, et cetera. And yet, current availability goes the other way. There are far fewer options for the long haul than there are for many of these other categories. And I could talk about lots of these other categories, but I'm really going to focus on long haul for the reasons that you saw on the slide before. Here is one decarbonization scenario that my staff did. This is a little while ago in 2014, looking at European tractor trailers, looking at life cycle emissions and CO2 equivalent. The base case increasing from 2015 to 2050. And then roughly, and we see this in light-duty vehicle too, with efficiency standards indicating a capability to tread water, to offset growth, but not really to bend the curve down, right? And offsetting growth, and I'll show you those slides in the future when we get into the policy discussion. We do think there's a tremendous amount of opportunity with efficiency standards for heavy-duty trucks and buses. But still, there is also a huge amount of opportunity on the fuel cell and on the battery-intensive side. And I'm going to talk to you more about what those technologies are, just to let you understand what you're looking at here. The efficiencies in the purple. The fuel cell intensive is the dotted blue line, meaning 50% fuel cells, 15 electric, and then they just swap that ratio for the electric intensive, meaning that you can get some additional reductions if you really focus on either battery electrics or catenary lines, et cetera. All right, so that gives you our framing. Now let's take a look at the technologies, and I take a look at 3 E-roads, electric roads, hydrogen fuel cells, and then battery electric. And my big picture metaphor here is that we are really encountering, at least for the last 2, something of a mystery, in that we have major businesses that are putting forward models, the details of which have yet to be revealed, but I'll talk about that in a minute. So the status of ZEV heavy duty. We mainly have demonstration programs, drayage and regional haul, for example, and there is a potential for long haul that I'll talk about. There are a small number of companies, Nikola, which is a small Salt Lake City, Utah-based company, and Tesla, as everybody knows, talking about long haul operation in the 2019, 2020, 2021 timeframe. And then infrastructure gets to be a huge challenge. We talked about it with light-duty vehicles. It is certainly also for heavy-duty. And we'll talk about infrastructure as we go. Here are a nice, quick sort of like, this is not a holistic or comprehensive view, but some idea of the demonstration projects that are going. You can see E-Highway in California with Siemens, battery electric with UPS. I'm not going to go through all of these, but you can see that there's a lot going on in Europe. There's a lot going on in California on a lot of these trials. And here are stacked bar charts. And the nice thing just from this conference's perspective is that California and Germany do seem to lead in heavy-duty ZEV freight demonstration projects. There's a lot of countries in Europe that are doing different demonstration projects, and I have California here as well, but if you look at the chart, California in brown and Germany in blue, both for medium-duty BEVs, heavy-duty BEVs, and certainly with in-road catenary and even fuel cell with California, a lot of demonstration projects in those 2 countries. So a lot going on there, Christian and others, to collaborate on and draw lessons learned from. I think there's a fruitful collaboration and partnership there. All right, so now let's look at the three major categories, at least in my view, of options. And the first is e-roads, meaning that you electrify major highways, either through catenary lines or through burying the wires and using inductive charging. There was a very, very nice study done in 2016 looking at Denmark as a case study. And here you see Volvo providing an option with their inductive charging. And you can see the roads that would be electrified in Denmark. And the idea was that they would try to find roads that were 50 kilometers of almost every population, right? And so that's the amount of roads that they would have to electrify. So a limited number, 2,700 kilometers to be exact. And the calculation was that that would cost about $500 million a year, but only about 5% of the $10 billion annually for heavy-duty investments. That's vehicles, that's fuel, that's maintenance, that's all lumped together. And so the researchers posit that with some type of a fee, relatively modest, you could fund this system. Right? And the nice thing about this is, unlike hydrogen fuel cells or battery electric trucks, the technology is here today, right? We know how to do it. The vehicles are essentially here. And so, and you give up a lot, not having to worry about batteries, weight, cost, et cetera. So a very, very interesting proposal, I think. And certainly the challenge here, right, and we're going to get to this over and over and over again, is infrastructure. And in this particular case, you cannot have a company like Tesla or like Nikola or Bosch that's going to say, I independently am going to now put either catenary lines or dig up roadways and put all that. You need to have a public-private partnership. And it also doesn't make all that much sense to only do it in one country if other countries don't do it. So you have this sort of logistic challenge, despite the fact that this does seem to be an option which is on the table right now for everybody. All right. So one of the other options that has been talked about for a long, long time for long haul is hydrogen fuel cells. And there's a startup company, as I already mentioned, Nikola. By the way, Nikola Tesla is not the only inventor in the world. The fact that we have two major companies that decided that this is the only inventor that they can name themselves after seems odd. But now we're out of names for Nikola. So if there's another company, they'll have to find another inventor. It might be a middle name, and I wouldn't put it past him. So here on the right-hand side, I'm going to tell you what they're proposing. And I'm not saying that we've done any assessment as to whether or not how they're going to do this, but it is striking just that they apparently have a business model, right? And the idea is that they will lease trucks for $4,000 to $5,000 a month, depending on the configuration, that the first 1,000,000 miles of fuel will be provided, right? They calculate that the average diesel long haul truck about 400,000 in fuel and racks up another 100,000 in maintenance costs. Those numbers seem quite correct to me, over 1,000,000 miles. They claim to have $2.3 billion with 7,000 pre-orders with deposits, and that's of June in 2016, right, some time ago now. They plan on building 364, very precise, refueling stations starting this year. I think one of the things that gave this a lot more credibility than it had when it was first announced is that Bosch has come in and partnered with them. That was a couple months ago now. And as a result of that partnership, they've pushed back the date of producing the vehicles from 2020 to 2021. That also suggests to me some more seriousness in this whole proposal. Right. The big question is refueling infrastructure. It is a big challenge for hydrogen. No one has made liquid hydrogen delivery yet, and very, very challenging to do trucks of gas. And so that really does seem to be the biggest challenge, and it's a mystery to us how they will do it. I mean, I think we heard this morning that California was thinking about or planning to do, if I remember correctly, 200 stations, right? This is far more than that, and it would be nationwide, right? So, you know, to me, This indicates that there must be a business model there somewhere, but it is worth investigating. It is worth watching closely. And from a regulator and a policy perspective, I would argue worth also thinking about what are the policies that can try to support this type of innovation. Here's a graph from the ICCT looking at the various types of options available for electrifying heavy-duty vehicles. We're comparing diesel hybrid, fuel cell based on natural gas, fuel cell based on renewables, and then the two forms of E-roads, overhead catenary lines, and inductive charging. And I'll start from the right. You can see that, as I've already said, that both the electric E-roads, essentially cost-effective today, right? If you could do the infrastructure, big question. Right? Fuel cells, depending on whether or not you're developing the hydrogen from renewable or natural gas, will be either in 2025 or 2030 in our projections. And then both diesel and diesel hybrids do increase in costs over time due to both climate standards and emission standards. We have a new entry. And before Mr. Musk decided to throw his hat into the ring, I think all the experts in the room would have said that battery electric long-haul tractor-trailer trucks are absurd. The batteries would be too heavy, they'd be too costly, it just doesn't make any sense. And yet, a lot of people have lost a lot of money betting against Elon Musk. So we should take this seriously. By the way, if you haven't seen the 17-minute video of his big announcement in California several months ago, I would recommend that you do. And the link is actually at the bottom of this page. And that's a photo on the left of him doing that announcement with these two battery electric trucks. And on the right, there you see the driver console. It's a center seat. It's got two touch screens. It looks pretty cool. My conversations, side conversations with experts and reading some of the articles about this, poo-pooing the importance of drivers actually enjoying these vehicles. At least in the United States, we have 100% turnover in drivers of long haul. If fleets could keep their drivers for another year, that would be massive savings, right? And so driver comfort, driver attractiveness, and all this. Performance is something which Elon Musk has sold the Tesla on very effectively. Does it matter that these trucks can go 0 to 60 unloaded in 5 seconds? Not really. But it makes for good showmanship. And you'll see that in the video. He makes great fun of the diesel truck as it goes through up shifting over 18 gears. It does, though, to the extent that the driver can drive 65 miles an hour up and down grade as opposed to 45, that does increase profitability because drivers are paid per mile. Range, we collectively had expected 300-mile range. He came out with 500, which again is surprising. Diesel truck, roughly 1,000 miles at full load and at highway speeds. Drag coefficient, really impressive, I would say. And this doesn't have to just be applied for this truck. It could be applied for diesels as well. For the most part, they have gap closers between the truck and the trailer, something that experts have been calling on for a long time. Because of the lack of transmission, et cetera, the underbody is just clean, right? And that helps a tremendous amount with drag as well. And you can see they don't have an engine, so they can design the forefront any way they want. Safety is improved. Operating costs dropping from $1.50 to $1.25. And with platooning, 75 cents a mile. The point with platooning, by the way, is this is not a fully autonomous vehicle. These are vehicles that can use technologies which are currently available right now. Right? There's still lots of challenges with platooning from a social perspective, a policy perspective, but it does seem that the technology is there. As with Nikola/Bosch, lots of pre-orders. Walmart, Pepsi, Anheuser-Busch, DHL, UPS, Ryder, et cetera. Walmart is a company, as in all these companies, that look at numbers very seriously. I would be very surprised if they didn't have a very good sense of how this was going to happen before signing up. There are big questions. We don't know what the price is. We don't know what the battery weight will be. The recharging network is not a simple task. When you are thinking about recharging a long-haul tractor with a massive battery of 800 to 1,000 kilowatt-hour battery pack, we're talking about 2.4 megawatts of power, right? So these are different. This does not just show up at the Tesla recharge station and plug in. It's a whole different type of network. And then finally, back of the envelope calculations by my staff, battery pack weighing over 10,000 pounds at a cost of $227,000, right? There's no way that can be the case and this be a business model. So again, lots of, this is a big mystery. As with the Nikola hydrogen fuel cell truck, big mystery, right? But I am just trying to frame to you that there must be business models out here. I don't know what they are, but they are worth our attention, right? All right. So I hope I have now gotten your attention both with the inventories and with the technologies. Now let's take a look at policies, right? And let's start with light duty, where we have spent most of our collective time and energy. And I'm just doing all right. Checking my time. So this is a graphic that the ICCT does and updates on a regular basis. There are now 10 markets, more than 80%, 85% of new vehicles sold are now sold into markets that have some form of fuel economy, CO2, greenhouse gas emission standards. These include the regular suspects, California, the US, Europe, Canada, Japan, and then newer, China, India, Brazil, Mexico, and for those of you who don't know, KSA, which we should actually call what it is, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Right. For those of you who don't know, they have standards as well, and they introduce a new reason for standards. Not oil security, not climate change, not international competitiveness, it's pure financial gain. Every barrel of oil that doesn't get sold internally at 35 cents a gallon in Saudi Arabia, they can make a lot more money on by selling externally. The pace of technological change has increased substantially since we started doing this, from about 1 or 2% a year on the rate of improvement to about 4 to 5 to 6. Very impressive. And at some point, when battery electric vehicles become cost competitive with the internal combustion engine, these standards will also drive EVs. And there's an internal debate at the ICCT as to when that will happen. The auto companies have been, to their own credit, extremely good at meeting challenges. 48-volt hybrids, for example, are going to come on and do a lot on efficiency at lower cost. Right? So there'll be lots of competition, but at some point we will start driving just through these standards, battery electrics. Heavy-duty vehicles. Heavy-duty vehicles we only started doing fuel economy standards for heavy-duty vehicles in 2005, 2006 with Japan. Right, compared to after the oil price shocks in the 1970s for the United States. And we have Japan, China, US, Canada, and India partially in this market, about 40% of global sales, right? A couple things to mention here. This is not an absolute graph, but you can see that you can show the percent reductions. This is far larger than the industry would have expected, I think, or experts, that you could get somewhere between 40 and 50% improvement over the course of 10, 15 years through fuel economy standards for heavy-duty vehicles. When I was first looking into this in the 2005 or 2004 timeframe, the industry claimed that the market was working perfectly and all the efficiency that was available was already being put on the trucks. That is absolutely not the case, as we can see. So lots of opportunity there, and lots of other countries are looking into it. Europe will now propose its first CO2 standards in May of this year, which is going to be an important moment. All right, let's look at ZEV mandates. This is a chart which shows China, California, Quebec, and Europe all having some form of ZEV mandate. And my First note to California that doggedly pursued these standards when they were seen as draconian, heavy-handed, et cetera, through the 1990s and 2000s, is take a bow. Right? Those standards are now seen as critical to doing this transformation, and my suspicion is the other countries will also take these up. I don't expect them to be as widespread as fuel economy standards, but I think, as I said earlier, that as subsidies phase down, these standards are going to be necessary. Europe has by far and away the most lofty targets, although they only go one way at this point, and that our optimistic estimate for Europe, if we take the manufacturers' predictions seriously, is that potentially 15 to 20% sales in the 2030 timeframe. And I think we would feel a lot more comfortable with that if the standards were both penalty as well as a credit. So here is a comparison of light-duty vehicle ZEV policies across major economies. And this is a comparison of lots of different countries. And here is a nice way of encapsulating what we've talked about yesterday and we talked about this morning, which is this panoply of standards and policies, fiscal, non-fiscal, regulatory, non-regulatory, consumer education, et cetera. We break them here: manufacturer, consumer purchasing, consumer use, fuel provider, and consumer awareness. And then we look at how different countries and regions are stacking up. And I'm not going to go through this whole thing. You can see lots of X's here. California having 19% of global electric vehicle sales. This is old. This is 2014. You can see that California has almost all of the boxes checked. And you find Germany here, third over, only 4%, at least in 2014, and certainly could use a couple more boxes to be checked. Right? And so this is a nice framework. It could certainly be built out a lot, but this gives you a nice frame for thinking about how all of the different things you could be doing to incentivize light-duty vehicles, and then by extension, heavy-duty. And if we looked at heavy-duty with this same chart, we would find that almost none of these boxes are checked. Right? And yet you still have Tesla and Nikola and Bosch coming forward with presumably business models that are going to work. California has a vision for zero-emission vehicle pathways for what they call sustainable freight. And I draw your attention to the fact that they start immediately with expanding enforcement of heavy-duty vehicles. And that's something that we could certainly use in Europe as well and around the world. Christian asked me a question about how we're collaborating with cities, and cities are doing a lot more on air pollution and trying to clean up existing fleets, heavy-duty and light-duty, and California is doing the same. California is putting in a network of remote sensing in order to figure out where the heavy polluters are and how to enforce. And then in the near term, looking at cleaner combustion technologies and zero-emission equipment, chopping NOx standards in the U.S., another 90%. Is what California projects that they need to meet their air pollution goals, looking at marine NOx and marine greenhouse gas emissions, both domestically and with the International Maritime Organization, and then finally ZEV measures. And this plan really does put out a lot of scopings where it says, here's the proposal, here's a lot of options for different segments, now let's go forward and sort these out, right? So this is a lot of framing rather than a lot of answers at the moment, but I do like the way they have chopped up the heavy-duty sector into lots of different segments. That's the only way to attack it, right? So my hat off again to California for taking this approach and pushing forward. So here is now looking at a chart for heavy-duty ZEVs, and again, customizing measures by different segments: bus, urban delivery, drayage, regional delivery, and long haul. And I won't go through all of this, but you can see different policies: city-level bans, city-level incentives, municipal fleet procurement, port emissions, coordinated long-term planning, sustainable long-term investments in R&D, demonstration projects, ZEV mandates, stringent efficiency and emission regulations, et cetera. This is a very nice way of at least framing the different types of policies that are necessary by segment. And I would argue it'd be nice to look at the differences between where California is and where Germany is. So here are my conclusions, and I learned a lot by doing this presentation, and I hope I'm doing a good job in communicating. The first being that heavy-duty vehicles deserve a lot more policy attention than they're getting. And they deserve that because of emission trends, because of efficiency opportunities, and because of prospects for heavy-duty vehicle technologies. We hear often that the heavy-duty sector is very diverse, very complicated, market forces are working there, regulatory efforts not so necessary, and more challenging. That may be the case, but let me posit that there is at least one reason why heavy-duty vehicles are easier than light-duty, and that is because these are businesses. These are not consumers. And these are businesses that are looking at total cost of ownership, and they calculate it down to the penny. And so whereas consumers vastly discount the benefits that you get in lower operating costs, lower maintenance costs, lower fuel costs, et cetera, Walmart, J.D. Hunt, all these companies are not going to do that. And to the extent that business models can be developed for lower cost, zero emission technologies, like the ones that we have been seeing evolving, right? Businesses will pay attention. And therein lies a huge difference between those sectors, and I think a very, very bright spot. So my third point, market-driven technology options, urban buses, emerging long haul, really suggests the time is ripe for us to think far more heavily and hardy and more seriously than we have in the past. I like California's template. We've talked about it a lot, but I think we need to get serious about it. And I think it's a terrific way for Germany to think about what it's doing and look at where the gaps are. And then finally, I'll be optimistic at the end to say that with a strong policy push, I really do think that the heavy-duty sector's cost of ownership approach could really accelerate the transition to zero-emission heavy-duty vehicles. And it's really a question for this group to figure out how to do that. So thank you very much for your attention.